In the Four Corners region, where Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah meet, the Colorado River and its tributaries are very important waterways that provide water for people to drink, for irrigation of crops, for plants and animals, for boating, and carved canyons that define the landscape of the region. Much of the Four Corners region is extremely dry and receives less than 10 inches of precipitation per year. The Colorado, San Juan, Animas, and Dolores rivers begin in the high mountains of Colorado, where as much as 5 times more precipitation falls, mostly as snow. As the snow melts during spring in the wetter, higher mountain areas, rivers carry melting snow to drier parts of the region. People and natural environments in the Four Corners depend on the delivery of large volumes of water from melting mountain snow. Over the last 120 years, 2 important aspects of the Colorado River have changed. One change was driven by the construction of dams in the Colorado River basin. The other was driven by changing climate and weather patterns. Jack Schmidt, a scientist who studies rivers at Utah State University, explains what Colorado River stream flow was like before the construction of dams.
The Colorado River is a small river by national standards. And it carries a modest amount of water, primarily transferring melting snow from the Rocky Mountains across the Colorado Plateau and down to the basin and range. And so it's always been characterized by having a large spring flood between May, June, and July, and then a very low flow season in late fall and winter. Because the river flows through deserts, it's of great value for water supply. But because its flow regime was so highly variable from the floods of spring to the low flows of the next fall, it was very hard to utilize that water.
Wade Graham, an environmental historian and professor of public policy at Pepperdine University, talks about the era of dam building along the Colorado River.
So starting in 1902, they began systematically building dams on the main stem of the river. They started down lower on the California-Arizona border, building big dams in order to divert water out of the basin to cities in Arizona, cities in California, cities elsewhere. And that spree of dam building really didn't stop until the 1970s, and it moved its way up the river from the California-Arizona border, and then of course the building of Boulder Dam outside of Las Vegas, which was the wonder of the world at the time, and really began the complete transformation of the river from a free-flowing system into the most heavily engineered river system on Earth. The dam building continued upriver to Glen Canyon Dam, which is just below us, about 200 miles, what backs up Lake Powell, and then into the upper basin. They federal government really dammed every tributary that they could conceivably put a dam in. So there really are hundreds of significant dams within the river system, and the impact of that is utter and total. Took a free-flowing river and turned it into a series of segments of dead water. It first of all stopped flood flows, which were critical to the way that the river worked. The Colorado River drains an arid area and also very, very high mountain snowpack, so it's extremely variable river, one of the most variable rivers anywhere that you can find. It'll go from barely a trickle at times to raging floods that would, more or less float a destroyer down the Grand Canyon. So the river system evolved with incredible variability, flood flows, and then low water periods, and the dams, of course, stopped that entirely.
The presence of dams reduced the height of spring floods and increased river flows during summer and fall. The largest spring flood on the Colorado River since the construction of dams was less than half the size of spring floods before the dams were built. While the building of dams greatly altered the seasonal patterns of flowing water, changes in climate over the last 100 years led to reductions in the total volume of water flowing in the Colorado River, and further changed seasonal patterns of river flows. Here's Jack Schmidt talking about these changes.
Researchers who study climate change and climate science of the Colorado River have demonstrated that the low flows of the 1950s were related to an unusually low period of precipitation. but not so with the most recent drought of the 21st century. It is strongly affected by a warming climate, and the precipitation has decreased relatively less, and the cause of the decreased runoff is a warming climate that increases evapotranspiration in the mountains. The vegetation lines are climbing up the mountains. You've extended the length of the growing season in the watersheds, and the upland watersheds are just drier. And so the amount of water that runs off for the same amount of precipitation is decreasing. And so the 21st century drought, the conditions that we've been in for the last 20 years, is a historically notable drought that is significant over the last 1,000 years. And it's only partly caused by precipitation. It's largely caused by a warming climate.